China is big. The third largest nation in the world, in fact, and this has long been the subject of international controversy, stretching well beyond the traditional core territories of the ethnic majority Han Chinese. The borders of the modern People's Republic of China encompass the homelands of peoples such as the Tibetans, Uyghurs, and southern Mongolians. These minority groups have for decades been engaged in a struggle to maintain their unique cultures, languages, and religious practices against government pressure to assimilate them into the Chinese mainstream. But how did the Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Mongolians become part of the Chinese state in the first place? If the 19th century was China's century of humiliation, then the 18th was China's century of imperial conquest. In the same era that the empires of Europe colonized their way through the Americas, the sons of heaven on the dragon throne were expanding the borders of the celestial empire further than they had ever gone before, bringing the grasslands of Mongolia, the sky-bound monasteries of Tibet, and the oasis cities of East Turkestan under their rule. In this video, we will explore the historical origin of China's modern ethnic tensions by examining how the lands of the Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Inner Mongolians became part of China during the golden age of China's final imperial dynasty.
Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job.
Emerging out of the mists of prehistory some 5,000 years ago, the traditional borders of Chinese civilization began rolling outwards from its origin point in the Yellow River Valley from the beginning of its ancient history. Throughout antiquity, innumerous non-Chinese tribes on the edges of the Celestial Empire were slowly assimilated into what we know today as the Han Chinese people. This incremental advance only stopped when it reached its logical geographical limits. In the east and south, it was halted by the sea and the jungle, while in the north and west, it tapered off upon encountering the desolate steppes of Inner Asia. These vast landlocked regions comprised an endless sprawl of arid deserts, dry grasslands, and brittle tundra, unsuitable for Chinese agriculture. Moreover, they were home to innumerous tribes of mounted, warlike nomads, who would play the role of China's traditional adversaries for millennia to come. For countless centuries, the central question of Chinese foreign policy centered around how to mitigate the incursions of those damned barbarians beyond the boundaries of their civilization. This was primarily achieved through submission, diplomacy, or building very, very long walls, which can be seen from space. The prospect of solving the nomad problem through military conquest was attempted several times, but trying to subjugate entire tribes of highly mobile horse people with no permanent cities to hold was as futile as catching wind in a net, and these efforts were rarely sustainable in the long term. Indeed, the Han Chinese were not good at conquering the northern nomads, but the northern nomads were good at conquering China. The most famous example of this was the Great Mongol Horde that obliterated the southern Song dynasty in the 13th century and founded the Yuan dynasty, ruled by the descendants of Genghis Khan. The Mongol-ruled Yuan Empire was short-lived, deposed after less than a century by the native Han Chinese Ming dynasty, who, like their predecessors, preferred a generally defensive border policy. In summary, the emperors of China were historically unable to expand the administrative boundaries of the Middle Kingdom beyond the traditional agrarian homeland of the Han Chinese people in a lasting and sustainable way. This, however, would change with the rise of China's final imperial dynasty, the Great Qing. The origins of the Qing Dynasty lie with the Jurchens, a northeast Asian people from beyond the Great War. Although they were not nomadic, the Jurchens shared many traits with their Mongol neighbours, particularly a robust martial culture that emphasized prowess in horseback archery. In the year 1616, the great warlord Nurhaki of the Xinjiang clan consolidated the Jurchen tribes under his banner, after which the entire people were given a new name, the Manchus. Meanwhile, the Ming dynasty collapsed, buckling under the weight of plague, famine, and a massive peasant uprising. The Manchus seized upon this tumult, riding south and conquering all in their path. Beijing fell in 1644, and the rest of the Celestial Empire was subjugated in the ensuing decades. So it was that the Manchus became the masters of China, a privileged minority ruling over a Han Chinese population which vastly outnumbered them. Yet, it was not only the Han Chinese whom the Manchus came to rule over, but the Mongols, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and countless other peoples of Inner Asia as well. By the beginning of the 19th century, the Qing presided over a continental empire that was nearly 3 times larger than that of the domain of the Ming, an over 13 million square kilometer behemoth that expanded beyond the densely populated core of Chinese civilization into lands where camels traversed the lonely deserts between oasis cities, where herds of wild steppe ponies galloped across endless grasslands, and woolly yaks grazed in the shadow of towering monasteries nestled into high snow-capped mountains. The answer to why the Qing dynasty deviated from its predecessors to pursue a policy of vigorous land expansion was simple: those damned Mongols. Like every dynasty before it, the Qing dynasty contended with the serious threat of nomads along its frontiers. By the 17th century, the Great Mongol Empire was a thing of the past, but Inner Asia was still home to many smaller Mongol tribal confederations. These included the Chahar Mongols, who inhabited southern Mongolia, the Khalkha Mongols, who inhabited northern Mongolia, and the Oirat Mongols, who inhabited the arid western grasslands of what are now the Chinese provinces of Xinjiang and Qinghai. Many of these groups dreamed of uniting all the Mongols under their banner and reviving the great Chinggisid Empire. As such, they posed a serious threat to the security of the Qing's Chinese heartland. Where older dynasties handled the nomadic threat through a policy of defensive containment, the Manchu emperors of Qing decided that the best defense was a good offense. To that end, they pursued an aggressive policy of unifying the Mongols under their rule. The first phase in the Manchu subjugation of the Mongols began before their conquest of China. During the 1620s, the tribes of southern Mongolia were being menaced by a Chahar Mongol chieftain named Ligdan Khan. Ligdan Khan dreamed voraciously of reunifying the great Eurasian empire of his ancestor, Genghis Khan, for which he reaped a bloody harvest through the grasslands of Inner Mongolia. His warmongering soon brought his growing alliance of Mongol tribes to the borders of Manchuria, drawing the recently unified Manchu people into a conflict against him. For over a decade, Nurhaki and Hong Taiji fought a fierce war against Ligdan Khan, supported not only by their Manchu bannermen, but by numerous new allies among the southern Mongols who sought revenge upon Ligdan for his trespasses against them. By 1634, Hong Taiji had crushed Ligdan's forces, put the Khan to flight, and secured the fealty of southern Mongolia, whose tribes now recognized the Manchu emperor as their rightful sovereign. The second phase of war with the Mongols began during the time of Emperor Kangxi, as the longest reigning emperor in Chinese history consolidated the Manchu dynasty's control over a war-ravaged China. A powerful new Mongol regime arose in the west to challenge the authority of the Dragon Throne. Located in what is now the northern half of Xinjiang province, the Dzungar Khanate was a confederation of Oirat Mongols, unified under the rule of the dynamic chieftain Galdan. Galdan's rule was legitimized in 1678 by the Dalai Lama of Tibet, who bestowed upon him the title of Boshogtu Khan, meaning mandate-holding Khan. By the 17th century, most of the Mongol world had converted to Tibetan Buddhism. Consequently, A Mongol Khan endorsed by the spiritual leader of that religion was something like the equivalent to a medieval Christian ruler championed by the Pope. As the Dalai Lama's chosen warrior, Galdan was put in leading position to unite the Mongol people. Elevated by this endorsement, Galdan embarked on a spree of conquests, expanding the Dzungar Khanate southwards into the Tarim Basin to conquer the Uyghur Muslims and their rich oasis cities. Then, in 1686, the Bashogtu Khan launched a blistering invasion into the lands of the northern Khalkha Mongols, drawing him into a conflict with the Qing Dynasty. For 10 grueling years, the Dzungars, Qing, and their respective allies were deadlocked in a brutal war of attrition. But it would be the Kangxi Emperor who triumphed, personally leading a military expedition in 1696 that drove Galdan back into his western domains, where he died a year later from causes unknown. With the Dzungar threat to the Khalkha Mongols ended, the tribes of northern Mongolia swore fealty to the Great Qing, and were incorporated into the Chinese Empire like their southern Mongolian brethren had been 60 years earlier. It's here that we will pause our forward march through history to answer a pressing question. Why, precisely, was the Qing dynasty so successful at defeating the Mongols, a people who, in previous centuries, had been practically unstoppable? For one thing, the Manchus were excellent horse archers and could fight just like the Mongols did. The elite corps of the Manchu military were known as the Eight Banners, and were, perhaps, the most combat-effective soldiers in all of Asia. Additionally, the rise of the Qing coincided with the eastward expansion of another great power, the Tsardom of Russia, whose saber-wielding Cossacks were cutting a bloody swath through Siberia in their path to the Pacific Ocean. In centuries past, nomadic tribes who found themselves hard-pressed by China could simply pack up their yurts and withdraw northwards beyond the logistical limits of any Chinese army. Now, however, they found themselves blocked by the Russians in the north, while pursued by Qing forces from the east and south. Despite these factors, it was not military might which played the leading role in the Qing dynasty's pacification of Mongolia, but the diplomatic initiatives undertaken by the Qing bureaucracy to seamlessly integrate the Mongols into their growing empire. Like the Mongols, the Manchus were a northern people from beyond the Great Wall, and thus had had centuries to familiarize themselves with the social complexities of Mongolian politics. The Eight Banners military corps were expanded early on to incorporate Mongol regiments, and a policy of intermarriage between Manchu and Mongol aristocrats created tight kinship bonds between the two peoples. Indeed, in every war the Qing Empire fought in Inner Asia, there were as many Mongols riding with them as there were riding against them. Thus, it can be argued that the key to the Qing dynasty's subjugation of the Mongols was the Mongols themselves. Let us now step back into the flow of time, as the wars between the Dzungar Khanate and Qing Empire shift westwards into the ancient skybound civilization of Tibet. Since 1642, the towering Tibetan plateau had come under the domination of the Khoshut Khanate, an Oirat Mongol polity based in what is now China's Qinghai province. However, the Khoshut Khans did not rule the land directly, entrusting the governorship of Tibet to the Dalai Lama, who headed a civil government called the Ganden Phodrang out of the holy city of Lhasa. Despite being nominal vassals of the Khoshut Khans, the Dalai Lamas of Tibet quickly outgrew their protectors in importance, evolving into supremely influential kingmakers in the Mongol world by virtue of their spiritual authority over the predominantly Buddhist Mongol tribes. Since the time of Galdan, the leader of Tibet had shown favor to the Dzungar Khans, and this was a major political problem for the Qing dynasty. So long as the Dalai Lama championed the Dzungars as the leaders of the Mongol people, the loyalty of the Mongol tribes under Qing rule would always be uncertain. In 1708, the reigning Khoshut ruler, La Bzang Khan, made a play to restore his dynasty's supremacy over Tibet by initiating a military coup on the pro-Dzungar Dalai Lama and replacing him with a pro-Khoshut pretender. This provoked an eventual retaliation from the Dzungar Khanate, which invaded Tibet in 1717, crushing their fellow Oirat Khoshuts in battle and seizing control over the holy roof of the Buddhist world. The capture of Tibet by their Dzungar enemies provided the Qing Dynasty with the justification to launch their own invasion. By 1724, the Qing had successfully driven the Dzungars out of Tibet. Henceforth, the holy seat of the Dalai Lama came under the political domination of the Emperor of China. The Koshut Khanate followed suit, bringing Qinghai into the Chinese Empire as well. The end of the Dzungar century began in 1745, when the death of the Dzungar ruler Galdan Tsering generated a succession crisis that plunged the Oirat Mongols into a devastating civil war. In 1755, the reigning emperor, Qianlong, took advantage of the internecine chaos to go for the jugular. A 25,000-man strong army composed of Mongolian and Manchu regiments of the Eight Banners stabbed deep into the heart of Dzungaria, melting away the scattered resistance they faced. Several Oirat tribes joined under the Qing banner, as did the Turkic Uyghurs who had long languished under Dzungar rule. By 1758, the Dzungar Khanate had been abolished, and the homelands of the Oirat Mongols and Uyghur Muslims were conjoined and incorporated into the Qing Empire as a new territory called Xinjiang, meaning New Frontier. With that, the Qing had finally eliminated their most dangerous rival in their quest to unite the Mongol nations under their rule. Nevertheless, the Qianlong Emperor wished to be certain the Dzungar Khanate could never rise again, and his solution for this was as simple as it was chilling: genocide. From 1758 onwards, Qing armies orchestrated a horrific massacre aimed at ethnically cleansing the Oirat Dzungars in northern Xinjiang. Men, women, and children alike were cut down indiscriminately by their hundreds of thousands, exacerbated by an outbreak of disease. It is estimated that before the genocide, the Dzungar population had numbered some 600,000. By the time the killing ended, they had been reduced to less than 200,000, with nearly 70% of their entire people put to the slaughter. The annexation of Xinjiang was the last major territorial acquisition of the Qing Empire. Upon its conclusion, all the Mongol peoples who lived within striking distance of the Chinese heartland were now securely integrated into the Great Qing, thereby ending the threat of nomadic incursions which had plagued the Middle Kingdom for nearly 2 millennia. In order to maintain stability within its massive multicultural empire, the Qing government utilized a dual administration system, which separated the Han Chinese inner territories from the Mongolian, Tibetan, and Uyghur outer territories. China proper was ruled directly by the Qing emperor, who presided over a centralized bureaucratic hierarchy of scholar officials who could be appointed or dismissed at the pleasure of the imperial court. In contrast, the non-Han frontier regions were controlled indirectly, with local native rulers being hand-picked to rule over their communities on behalf of the Qing emperor. In Mongolia, these local rulers took the form of a patchwork of Mongol princes known as jasags. The Uyghur people, for their part, were administered by a caste of Islamic beys. In Tibet, the Dalai Lama remained in control, albeit now in charge of a new governing council reformed by Qing authorities. These vassal rulers were closely monitored by a government agency known as the Lifan Yuan, whose agents served as the direct liaison between the imperial court and its autonomous subjects. While previous Chinese dynasties had tried and failed to control the peoples beyond their frontier on Chinese terms, the Qing emperors understood the necessity of a more flexible approach. Being themselves a non-Chinese people, the Manchus knew that enforcing Chinese culture on their non-Han Chinese subjects was a recipe for resentment and rebellion. It was on that token that the Qing emperors wore many cultural faces, using different symbols of power and legitimacy to appeal to the different ethnicities under their rule. The ruling Manchu sovereigns presented themselves to their Han Chinese subjects in the image of the classic Chinese emperor, a studious Confucian son of heaven. Yet, to the Tibetans, they posed as the pious incarnation of the Bodhisattva Manjushri. To their Turkic and Mongolian subjects, the Qing emperors portrayed themselves as the great Khans and emphasized the Imperial Aisangyorou clan's ostensible ancestral ties to the bloodline of Genghis Khan. Over time, the Manchu elites of China became increasingly Sinicized, abandoning their own language and customs for Chinese ones. Nevertheless, the Qing emperors never lost sight of the multicultural nature of their massive domain, expounding on their ideology that they were bringing together the outer, non-Han people together with the inner Han people into one family, united in the Qing state. Initially, the imperial court put tight restrictions on Han Chinese migration into the non-Han outer territories. The Han Chinese were far more populous than every other ethnicity in the Qing Empire combined. If allowed unrestricted migration into the outer territories, their sheer numbers would quickly outpopulate the Uyghurs, Mongolians and Tibetans in their own homelands, sparking racial tensions and political instability. However, a variety of factors soon rendered the Qing Empire's anti-migration laws unenforceable. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the population of China more than doubled in size, from 180 million to 430 million. This exponential growth placed immense demographic pressure on the inner provinces of the Qing Empire, especially when floods or droughts struck the land, leaving the newly increased populations in the grips of a famine. It was due to these conditions that millions upon millions of Han Chinese began illegally migrating into regions like Manchuria, Inner Mongolia, and Xinjiang, absorbing these ethnically distinct territories into the empire's Han Chinese center of gravity. Indeed, by the beginning of the 20th century, the ancient homeland of the Manchu people was fully assimilated into Han China. The majority of its population was now Han Chinese, and the Manchus themselves had, after centuries of ruling over the Chinese, become indistinguishable from them in language and culture. The Mongolians and Uyghurs fared better at preserving their languages and traditions, but their homelands too had, by the turn of the century, become home to a sizable population of Han Chinese settlers. During the latter half of the 19th century, the Qing Dynasty had entered into a terminal decline. Beset upon by innumerable socio-economic woes and eaten alive by the great powers of Europe and Japan, the final Imperial dynasty of China croaked its last breath in October of 1911, when the Xinjiang Revolution ended the rule of the Manchu emperors and put in its place the Republic of China. Carved up by warlords, invaded by the Japanese, and plunged into a brutal civil war between communists and nationalists, China spent the first half of the 20th century in a state of perpetual chaos. Despite this, the outer territories incorporated into China during the Qing dynasty either remained a part of or were reclaimed by China when the dust had settled. There were some exceptions, of course. Several of the erstwhile dynasty's northern territories, including the northern parts of Manchuria, were annexed by the Russians, while the outer part of Mongolia became an independent socialist republic under the Soviet Union's umbrella of influence. Today, the modern People's Republic of China maintains control over Tibet, the Uyghur homeland of Xinjiang, and the autonomous region of Inner Mongolia. Unlike during the Qing dynasty, when the Han Chinese were one among many subject peoples in this massive country, they are now both the ruling caste and the dominant demographic majority. Faced with increasing pressure to assimilate into mainstream Chinese culture and increasingly marginalized in their own homelands, the future of China's Mongolian, Turkic and Tibetan minorities remain uncertain. Their future struggles a legacy of China's recent imperial past. More videos on the history of China are on the way, so make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video. To watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.